These experiments have been repeated also in Nice, and his calorimetry and his analysis for excess heat has been independently evaluated by Wilfred Hansen, who had the task from the Utah Committee on Energy to evaluate the result, the work of Stan Pons and Martin Fleischmann, and we published as an appendix, in an appendix to this book, the report, very detailed report is given, of which of course he had given excerpts at the conference he has given to the Utah Committee on Research. I don't know what Utah will make out of this, but I mean, this will, I hope, this will finish, this will end the, forever, from the scientific standpoint, the controversy whether Fleischmann and Pons were good enough to measure that amount of heat. And in fact, the conclusion with a completely different system of analysis for Wilfred Hansen are totally in agreement with the original conclusion of Fleischmann and Pons, and the conclusion for which they were essentially driven out of this chemistry. And this ought to be underscored, underlined very strongly, because I regard that as well, I think, can I use a strong word, as a shame for this country and for the scientific establishment. Then there is an interesting review of the conference by a person who was skeptical. I mean, Heinz Gerischer is a very well respected, very famous, I think is the dean of the German electrochemist, who was invited just because we're not a sense of true believer. We wanted to have from many places eventually negative feedback, and he came very skeptic, and in his final talk he became actually quite optimistic, quite open. And I understand later on he even went out of his way, sending a memo to his colleagues in Germany and urging them to take up very seriously this kind of work. Well, there are many other things. I hope you will see them of yourself. I don't want to take more of your time. I only wanted to convey you the feeling, and that in fact what was found at Como finds that the last events, both tragic and hopeful, that happened are a most important confirmation. And finally, I would like to tell you, just to report to you, a statement that Stan Pons gave in Italy at the workshop that we have organized in Torino for the people of, for the small community of people who are now pursuing in Italy called fusion. And Stan Pons, to a journalist of the Italian RAI, yes, made this statement that he thought that a demonstration device could be presented to the public before the end of this year. And that is a very hopeful thing. Thank you very much. Now, I think should we go through some...
You'll have questions. I think that would be an excellent thing. We definitely want to do that. But I just wanted to mention one concluding remark or two, if I may. Basically, I think to summarize the totality of the remarks that I made earlier and now backed up by this excellent review of the highlights of the Como results, what's happening now basically with the negative position against cold fusion? 3 words basically: arrogance and vested interests. The arrogance, which has been there from the beginning, but which is even worse now, leads them not even to look at the data any longer. They don't look at the data. In fact, the reason why my technology review article, 9,000 words, was first approved by the editor and then mysteriously withdrawn was from a physicist at MIT, Dr. Feshbach, whom I asked about his views on cold fusion, just to find out why he had blackballed this article, which was a middle-of-the-road sort of article on cold fusion. And he said, I've had 50 years of experience in nuclear physics. I know what's possible and I know what's impossible. And then when I offered to show him the review, I think it's in this issue of August '91, Edmund Storm's review, or pending, it would have been pending, of that issue. I said, you want to look at the review by Edmund Storms? And he said, no, I don't want to look at any more evidence. It's all junk. And he hung up. That's it. Now, the other vested interests that we're getting, not only the vested interests now of hot fusion, by the way, but now we have the vested interests of those who put their foot so deeply down their throats that they can't get it out. They're going to have to admit they're wrong eventually, and they know it. That's the whole thing about the negative position. And another thing I do want to bring up, because it's fun and it's also very historically enlightening. Giuliano brought up the very key point of Galileo, which I agree with entirely. Originally, even when I was being tortured at MIT in last June, I felt that bringing up the Galileo parallel might be a little too strong. But the more I look at it, the more clear it becomes that it really isn't much different. It's just happening in the modern era. But there's another interesting parallel which would be particularly good for journalists to hear. Because I think there's a feeling among journalists in particular that how could this be that a revolutionary technology is emerging here? How could this possibly be? Is there any precedent for this? I mean, there's sort of a lack of belief about this. Well, guess what? There is, and I wish I had realized it before I finished my first book. I'll put it in the second book for you. Read Fred Kelly's authorized biography of the Wright brothers. And if you want to skip the beginning, begin at about page 60, and it will be like a deja vu experience. And I just wanted to review just a couple of little passages here. The Wright brothers, as you know, flew in December of 1903, but it was 1908 before the United States government acknowledged that they had a flying machine. They actually wrote letters to the Wright brothers after much correspondence saying, prove to us on paper that you have a flying machine. This was after they were flying all over the place, and the two of them were virtually exiled to France. Another parallel. Here, during this time now, we're talking about 1905 now. They still haven't been accepted by the world, even though they're flying all over Ohio, so to speak. During this time, the newspapers had continued to let the Wrights alone. Indeed, the failure of the newspapers in Dayton and elsewhere to say much about the history-making experiments at Huffman Field was often used as an argument to prove that there couldn't be any truth in the rumors that men had actually contrived a successful flying machine. You couldn't have kept a thing like that secret. Some reporters surely would have heard about it, was the remark. Dan Kumler, who was city editor of James Cox's Daily News in Dayton during those early years of flying, recalled in 1940, not long before his death, that many people who had been on interurban cars passing the field and seen the Wrights in the air used to come to the Daily News office to inquire why there was nothing in the paper about the flights. Such callers, said Kumler, got to be a nuisance. And why wasn't there anything in the paper, he was asked, Kumler, before he died. We just didn't believe it, he said. Of course, you remember that the Wrights at the time were terribly secretive. We've heard that too, haven't we, about cold fusion? You mean they were secretive about the fact that they were flying over an open field? I guess, said Kumler, grinning after a moment's reflection, the truth is that we were just plain dumb. That's the whole story, friends. And now if you have questions, we will answer them for you. Surely there must be questions. Yes?
What are you finding in your basement?
What am I finding? Rats, dirt. We started a very crash program to attempt, we have a microphone person here. I used to be a VOA person, so I know the need for good sound. To attempt to replicate this amazing Takahashi experiment that we've heard about. We don't have the thing running yet. We're preparing to do it almost exactly as he did.